Welcome to National Action Network's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day Virtual Awards, where we honor individuals in their respective fields whose work have expanded justice and equality in their communities. Now, please welcome the new chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Honorable Joyce Beatty, representing Ohio's 3rd Congressional District.
I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, Chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus. It is an honor for me to participate in the 2021 National Action Network's Dr. Martin Luther King Day Breakfast. First, let me say thank you to my dear friend and founder of the National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton. Reverend, I can't thank you enough for all of your leadership in the fight for justice, for being a friend to the Congressional Black Caucus, and someone I'm honored to be able to call upon. To Ebonie Riley, Bureau Chief, thank you for all of your hard work. And to another friend, Martin Luther King III, thank you for co-chairing this incredible breakfast event. To all of the honorees, Sir Hillary Beckles, Kavanaugh Brown, Cindy Benavidez, Latasha Brown, and Dr. Anthony Fauci, congratulations. The last 4 years have certainly been trying and difficult for all of us. With the knees of injustice on our neck, police shootings, racial disparities, voter suppression, attacks on our democracy, COVID-19, and now the recent January 6 United States Capitol insurrection with white supremacy on display. But Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It is always the right time to do what is right." And this is the right time that the nation has elected a new president and vice president, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, our first female black vice president. But none of this would have been possible without Martin Luther King Jr. and his fight for civil rights and voting rights. When the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed into law, it was stated, "This is a triumph for freedom, as huge as any victory that has ever been won on any battlefield." And now, Black Americans come out in record numbers to vote, waiting 3, 4, or more hours in line to vote. And thus, we elect Black Americans to build back better. Thank you, National Action Network, for your hard work to mobilize and get people registered to vote and to the polls. Because change does not roll in on wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. The Congressional Black Caucus has been in the struggle. This marks our 50th anniversary, and we enter it with a historic 60 members. So I pledge to you that we will fight to eradicate systemic racism. We will fight for affordable health care, housing, and education. We will fight for racial wealth equity and sustainability, and reform our criminal justice system and clean up our environment. Because Martin Luther King Day is a day of service. It is a day on and not a day off. And so with that, I join you today in the fight for justice, in the fight for one standard of justice, decency, and equal opportunity for all. God bless you. God bless America. And I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message.
Now, please welcome Trudy Grant, Manager of Religious Affairs and External Relations for National Action Network's Religious Affairs Division.
Hello, I'm Trudy Grant, and I'm the Manager of Religious Affairs and External Relations of the National Action Network. We at NAN view our work as an extension of the social justice ministry of the Black Church, a ministry grounded in the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As mandated by our founder and president, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and guided by our chairman, Dr. W. Franklin Richardson, the Department of Religious Affairs' main function is to remind the church to be the headlight and not the taillight in the struggle for justice. Reverend Nelson B. Rivers III, Vice President of Religious Affairs and External Relations of NAN, and I are committed to ensuring that that message is delivered to the faith community and our external partners. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. noted in the 1963 A Letter from a Birmingham Jail, the challenge for the Black church is not to merely be a thermometer of society that records the temperature, but to be the thermostat and help to transform and change society for the better. The National Action Network is a faith-based organization, and we believe that the crisis in our nation calls the Black church to action as never before. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Hello from Harlem, USA. We are Vi Higginson's Sing Harlem Choir, and we are so delighted to bring you song on today. At this time, we ask you to please rise for the Negro National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, or ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. 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 Victory is won.
For nearly 30 years, National Action Network has championed the cause of social justice by promoting a modern civil rights agenda for all. With over 100 chapters across the country, it is a national movement for equality rooted in the spirit and tradition of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Despite the extreme challenges of 2020, NAN redoubled its activism and efforts to fight for the voiceless and push for change at the highest levels possible. In January, NAN kicked the year off with its annual King Day breakfast in Washington, D.C., featuring former President Bill Clinton, as well as dignitaries like Martin Luther King III and others. While at its headquarters in Harlem, New York, they convened their yearly public policy forum with elected officials and throngs of public support. NAN's Irvington, New Jersey chapter hosted a 2020 census workshop educating people on the significance of participation. Chapters across the nation encourage people to fill out the census to ensure that everyone is indeed counted. Following the South Carolina Democratic debate, Reverend Sharpton and NAN hosted a minister's breakfast featuring candidates such as Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and others.
Thank God we have all of you in this room, but also particularly Jim, because he reminds us of who we are. What you're doing to the least of my brethren, you're doing to me. That's what it's about. That's how I was raised.
The breakfast focused on creating a civil rights agenda for 2020 and beyond, as well as helping to mobilize Black churches ahead of the pivotal presidential election. NAN's annual Western Regional Conference convened chapter members from California, Arizona, and Nevada to address issues impacting marginalized and minority communities. The conference included plenary sessions as well as a Rock the Vote concert presented by NAN's California Youth Huddle. As the catastrophic COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States, NAN stepped up its efforts to help those most devastated from the impact. The Harlem headquarters teamed up with Sylvia's Restaurant and World Central Kitchen to distribute meals to the thousands in need. NAN's efforts to feed the hungry expanded to New Jersey, South Carolina, California, Florida, Michigan, and elsewhere. These initiatives continued for months, and NAN distributed over 1 million meals across the nation. The NAN Tallahassee chapter partnered with the Capital City Chamber of Commerce to provide small business grants to those suffering hardship due to the pandemic. Meanwhile, the NAN Sacramento chapter teamed up with Lyft and the Sacramento Food Bank to help deliver resources. And in Detroit, NAN provided groceries and medical deliveries to those in need. The Atlanta chapter even launched a COVID relief fund. As the global pandemic raged, the fight for police reform continued as well, and NAN was at the forefront, leading the way. The Louisville chapter hosted a press conference in front of the courthouse to demand justice for Breonna Taylor, who was shot and killed by police as she slept in her bed.
We're here to bring people together. And it starts locally. All politics start at the local level. So, Mayor, we are telling you today, we are demanding you today that you be a fearless, courageous leader. Stand up to the enemy. Stand up for what you know in your heart is right.
After the gruesome police killing of George Floyd, Reverend Sharpton met with his family members and stood alongside grieving loved ones. He delivered a powerful eulogy at Floyd's funeral, calling out systemic racism and the need for police reform.
Ever since 401 years ago, the reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed to be in is you kept your knee on our neck. We were smarter than the underfunded schools you put us in, but you had your knee on our neck. We could run corporations and not hustle in the street, but you had your knee on our neck. We had creative skills. We could do whatever anybody else could do. But we couldn't get your knee off our neck. What happened to Floyd happens every day in this country, in education, in health services, and in every area of American life. It's time for us to stand up in George's name and say, get your knee off our necks. God always uses unlikely people to do his will. If George Floyd had been an Ivy League school graduate and one of these ones with a long title, we would have been accused of reacting to his prominence. If he'd been a multimillionaire, they would have said that we were reacting to his wealth. If he had been famous athlete, as he was on the trajectory to be, we would have said we were reacting to his fame. But God took an ordinary brother from the third ward, from the housing projects that nobody thought much about but those that knew him and loved him. He took the rejected stone, the stone that the builder rejected. They rejected him for jobs. They rejected him for positions. They rejected him to play certain teams. God took the rejected stone and made him the cornerstone of a movement that's going to change the whole wide world.
His words galvanized the nation and sparked a new intergenerational, interracial movement in the fight for social justice. He announced NAN's Commitment March on Washington. The Get Your Knee Off Our Necks rally took place on August 28th, coinciding with the 57th anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington.
This is the time for legislative change. This is the time for us to vote like we never voted before. And don't just vote for the top of the ticket. Vote all the way down. Go down from the top to the bottom. Vote all the way to the dog catcher. We want to get rid of anybody that's in our way, because our parents died to give us the right to vote. You can mess with the mail, but it ain't the sacrifice that Goodman and Cheney and Swerner gave. Our vote is dipped in blood. Our vote is dipped in those that went to their grave. We don't care how long the line. We don't care what you do. We're going to vote not for one candidate or the other, but we're going to vote for a nation that'll stop the George Floyds, that'll stop the Breonna Taylor.
The march drew over 200,000 people to the nation's capital. NAN took the unprecedented steps of handing out masks, conducting temperature checks, and urging people to social distance as they rallied for justice.
We have mastered the selfie and TikTok. Now we must master ourselves. Less than a year before he was assassinated, my grandfather predicted this very moment. He said that we were moving into a new phase of the struggle. The first phase was the civil rights, and the new phase is genuine equality. Genuine equality is why we are here today and why people are coming together all across the world, from New Zealand to New Jersey. He said that we must not forget the days of Montgomery. We must not forget the sit-ins movement. We must not forget the Freedom Rides, the Birmingham movement, and Selma. Papa King, we won't!
I wish George were here to see this right now. That's who I'm marching for. I'm marching for George, for Breonna, for Ahmaud, for Jacob, for Pamela Turner, for Michael Brown, Trayvon, and anybody else who lost their lives or are too evil. It's never been more clear than change right now. It's happening right now because we demand it. Everyone here has made a commitment because they wouldn't be here for no other reason right now. Everybody out here right now, our leaders, they need to follow us while we're marching to enact laws to protect us.
For coming out here and continuing to say her name louder. What we need is change, and we're at a point where we can get that change, but we have to stand together. We have to vote.
During a critical election year, NAN's Ohio chapter created a Get Out the Vote commercial. As the South Carolina chapter marched to Senator Lindsey Graham's office to demand support for voting and policing legislation. Chapters across the country encourage voter registration and participation. At a time of intense voter suppression, NAN increased its efforts to push back against draconian measures designed to disenfranchise Black voters. Following the election, Reverend Sharpton and NAN were signatories to a coalition of civil rights leaders demanding that all votes be counted. Reverend Sharpton then wrote a letter to Congressional Black Caucus Chairwoman Karen Bass asking her to prioritize Black health equity in 2021. In Newark, New Jersey, NAN's Tech Center, under the leadership of Northeast Regional Director Reverend Steffi Bartley, blossomed into a staple in the community. The Tech Center provided laptops to students and played a critical role in helping them get up to speed as the country moved to virtual learning. In this challenging year, Reverend Sharpton also released his long-awaited book, Rise Up, Confronting a Country at the Crossroads. A rousing call to action, the book draws on his decades of experience fighting the good fight. Across its various chapters, NAN's youth members have also been recognized for their immense contributions and received various awards for their work. In 2020, NAN formalized its Youth and College Division to continue to empower the visionary voices of young activists. NAN's Youth Huddle made the pivot to a virtual format and have been conducting a Operation Save Ourselves series and its weekly forums. We remember Baltimore, Maryland youth leader David Carter, an energetic and committed young man who died earlier this year. May he rest in peace and power. The organization's commitment to serving those in need has never waned. This year, like every year before, NAN provided Thanksgiving meals to those in need at its Harlem headquarters as well as at the Atlanta office. Under the leadership of NAN's Executive Vice President and General Counsel, Michael A. Hardy, NAN continues to host Legal Night. Launched around 10 years ago, Attorney Hardy and a team of lawyers provide a forum where individuals can have their legal questions addressed for free. In the year of COVID-19, the forum has been held virtually, creating an online space for the dissemination of legal assistance. NAN lost a number of members, friends, supporters, and champions in 2020. We remember them all. These giants include stalwarts of the civil rights movement, such as Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowery, Reverend C.T. Vivian, and Congressman John Lewis. It was during Congressman Lewis's remarks in Selma at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge that Reverend Sharpton helped to hold the civil rights icon up as he urged Americans to stay in the fight and to create, quote, good trouble. It would be the last time Congressman Lewis visited the site of Bloody Sunday. NAN also pays tribute to New York City Mayor David N. Dinkins. Mayor Dinkins' strong support of the mission and vision of National Action Network was evident from the beginning. He was a trailblazer who broke barriers, restored civility, and was committed to building bridges. We honor all of their legacies and continue the work. And NAN is just getting started. Whether it's holding leaders accountable, feeding those in need, fighting on behalf of victims of police brutality, or inspiring the next generation of civil rights advocates, National Action Network is ready for the next 30 years and beyond.
We witnessed after the death of George Floyd and others, many in the private sector began saying, we need to do more. We need to give money to social justice movements. We need to do more on civil rights. But then there have been sponsors that have been with National Action Network and saw the need even before summer 20. And we have them staying with us even through this pandemic, sponsoring our being able to convene virtually. Our National Action Network board member, Tanya Lombard of AT&T, who coordinates a lot of what the private sector does, has reported to the board that this year our sponsors have even increased, and those that have been with us down through the decades are still there and are there even more. Let me pause to thank our sponsors, ensuring you those that are in the private sector but thinking not robbery to support the public good.
Hey family, show us that you're tuning in. Use the hashtag NanMLK21 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for a chance to win a raffle item sponsored by our friends at Stars, or an item sponsored by our friends at Denny's.
As we gather for the 2021 Martin Luther King Jr. Breakfast by the National Action Network, co-chaired every year by Martin Luther King III and I, it is to say that those of us that are engaged in the struggle for social justice, for human and civil rights, know that this is not a day to take off. This is a day to take on, to continue to fight for justice, fairness, and equality. Dr. King is not in history because of an inactive, uninvolved type of journey. It's because he was proactive, deeply involved, that the nation had to stop and salute a man who never held political office, didn't have a title that meant anything in high society, but his work and his service changed the nation that he lived in, born, and ultimately was assassinated in. And that is why we have gathered for the last several years on the holiday morning at the nation's capital to dine together, review where we are, honor those that have been consistent and in most cases persistent to keep Dr. King's dream alive. Particularly this year, a year where we have seen such pain. The Black Lives Matter marches reacting to a continuity of police killings of unarmed people, from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, to Ahmaud Arbery, to the Rashad Brooks in Atlanta, and on and on. Many of those that personally we were involved in, National Action Network and marches and demonstrations, and I eulogizing George Floyd's both funerals, and Martin III involved in all of them, culminating August 28th as we called a commitment march to Washington, where in the midst of a pandemic, over 208,000 people came to Washington, face masks, temperature taken, and had a rally with all of the families, showing that we committed to keep the dream alive and fight for legislative change. The George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the John Lewis Voting Act, just as 57 years before, at the same spot, Dr. King had come for the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the '65 Voting Rights Act. And we stood with Martin and Dr. King's granddaughter, Yolanda, as they stood where their father and grandfather stood and spoke. And the victims' families stood there and spoke before this huge gathering. Not one incident of violence, not one arrest, as we spent that day and marched to the Martin Luther King Monument. Well, not long after that, the election happened, and more Americans voted in the election. But then there was the backlash, those with conspiracy theories, those that felt that they had the right to have an insurrection, a coup d'etat, right in Washington. It is in the backdrop of all of that that we still pause this morning for the Martin Luther King breakfast. And we honor those who were able to have their light shine even in the darkness of the last several months, who were able to remain steady even in the midst of an unprecedented pandemic, and who was able to keep hope alive in the midst of such despair. To start us, none has personified this continuity of struggle, this keeping us focused, keeping our eye on the prize of what Dr. King stood for and what it means for us to continue, that his heir, his namesake, his son, my partner in fighting, whether we had gone to jail together in St. Louis, fighting in peaceful protests for black contractors, whether we marched together from Sanford, Florida for Trayvon, all the way to funeralizing George Floyd. We walked together. He is definitely personifying the dream of his father. I'm talking about human rights activist extraordinaire, Martin Luther King III.
It is always an extraordinary honor to be a part of the King Day observance celebrations for the National Action Network and to join Reverend Sharpton and many across our nation as we observe the annual Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. A few days ago, January 15th, had my father lived, he would have been 92 years old. And we in our nation have been observing the King holiday for 34 years. This is the 34th federal observance. But this one perhaps is more unique than we've seen in a long time, because our nation has done something that perhaps has not happened in a number of years. And first and foremost, we have seen the tragedy occurring at the national level where white resistance personalities came to our nation's capital and attempted to destroy and desecrate. We've seen domestic terrorism at its worst. We've seen white privilege on steroids. Because we know that had blacks chose to come, blacks and whites, as Black Lives Matter supporters, to come to the nation's capital and protest in the way that these white Americans did, that number one, the results would have been beyond tragic and maybe led to many deaths. Tragically, 4 people died when this scenario took place, but it would have led to far more deaths had it been black folk. It seems that some people don't want democracy, and it starts with the current commander-in-chief, who is only going to be there just a few more days, thank God. But what is interesting, and my father used to say, we have to hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope. Well, the hope came this year in November in the state of Georgia, when after 30 years, the state elected its Democratic nominee, voted for President-elect Biden. But then on January 5th, another milestone, monumental step was taken. 2 United States senators were elected. One, an African-American pastor, Reverend Warfield Warnock, pastor of Ebenezer. Ebenezer, of course, is the church that I grew up in and my father was co-pastor of. And the second, Mr. John Ossoff. So Georgia elected a black pastor as its senator and its first Jewish United States senator. And this was done by a coalition of blacks and whites and Jews and young people and older people. It was very exciting. And it gives the president-elect and the vice president-elect the opportunity to really provide several areas of relief. The John Lewis Voter Registration Restoration Act can now be passed. The George Floyd Policing Act can now be passed because the majority in the United States Senate will be Democrats. You know, Dad talked about his vision of living in a nation where his 4 little children would not be judged by the content of their character, by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And that his dream of freedom, justice, and equality could come to fruition. Well, while we as Dad's children may not have totally seen that manifested, because of what has initially happened in terms of this election cycle, perhaps my daughter and his granddaughter, and my mother's granddaughter, Yolanda Renee King, will be able to see that dream come to fruition. Because her generation is not going to accept some of the things that we've seen, and they're going to make this nation a better place for all God's children. So I am very excited about what is potentially going to be embarked upon. Yes, we've got to address the pandemic first and foremost. We got to figure out how to get Americans back to work through an infrastructure plan. And we got to figure out how to make sure Medicaid expansion is expanded and make sure that everyone, from a medical perspective, their needs are addressed. That can be done now with a majority in the United States Senate and in the United States House, and with the president-elect and the vice president-elect. So this is an unusual King Day, but it is a King Day that we know a better nation and a better world can now come to fruition. It only takes a few good women and men to bring about change. Dad and his team and Mom and her team showed us that. The question becomes, what shall we continue to do to make our nation and world better for all humankind? And using the spirit of nonviolence, because Dad believed fervently in creating a nonviolent world. These things can happen through the spirit of nonviolence. Thank you, and God bless you.
Our first Visionary Award honoree is Miss Latasha Brown. Miss Brown is one of the dedicated organizers who has been laying the groundwork for this new South. In 2016, she founded Black Votes Matter and the Black Votes Matter Fund with fellow activist Cliff Albright. Their aim to increase the influence, power, and representation of Black people through effective policy and to invest in grassroots Black-led groups. Their commitment to making sure the Black community is heard helped increase Black voter turnout and ultimately flip Georgia blue for the first time in 28 years. At the intersection of social justice, political empowerment, human development, and the cultural arts, one will find Ms. Latasha Brown as a catalyst for change, thought leader, and social strategist. Her national and global efforts have been known to organize, inspire, and catapult people into action. Thank you, Ms. Brown, for being a vanguard of democracy.
It is with great pride that I present this award. Latasha Brown, born and raised in Selma, where the great battle around voting rights started. History records when Reverend Hosea Williams and John Lewis went across that bridge and fought the fight and were beaten for fighting that fight. Tear gas. Dr. King came into Selma and continued that march and went across that bridge to Montgomery. And it was that march from Selma that led to the Voting Rights Act. Out of that fight grew a young lady that, in my judgment and the judgment of National Action Network, has continued that battle, that continued that march, that banner, that drive to preserving and maintaining voting rights by her unequaled participation in going to grassroots communities all over the South all over Georgia saying that Black votes matter. And she became, for this generation, what Fannie Lou Hamer and others were for the generations that we stand on the shoulders of. We have a habit in America of only honoring those that have passed on, and certainly they are worthy of that honor. But living activists, living history makers, sometimes do not get their due. And we wanted Miss Brown to be honored while she can hear the honor and know the honor, and know that others in the movement that's way beyond her knowing that they're watching have nothing but respect and admiration for her sacrifice. No one knows the hours that she was on that road by herself sometimes with her volunteers and her coworkers. No one knows how it is to pull in and eat in places hurriedly and keep going to the next move. The sacrifices made, the sacrifices on their family. No one knows the kinds of doors that may have been shut in their face by those in the establishment that didn't appreciate her fighting to keep votes protected and to get voters engaged. And we want her on Martin Luther King's birthday to know that we know the reason the movement of Dr. King is still alive, and the movement of those that shed blood on that Edmund Pettus Bridge, and the movement of those that gave their lives like Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner was kept alive with the person of Natasha Brown. It is with great pride I give this award to you on this Martin Luther King Day.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton. I am so honored. I'm actually speechless. Just being over the years, really admiring your work and being mentored by your work from afar. And all the other people who have laid the foundation, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That just came up in my spirit. There's so many folks that we know the names and we don't know the names, who literally laid the foundation for us to do this work. And so the struggle continues. And we who believe in freedom shall not rest until it comes. And I'm just really honored to get this award, although I'm trying to feel comfortable with it because I think there's so many people who deserve so much recognition. Through the years, this has been a collective journey that our people, when we work together, we have power. And what happened in Georgia is that two things. One, that Black folks believed in their own power, and two, we used a movement of love to actually trump a movement of hate. And if we continue to stay rooted in that, we can actually transform and radically reimagine this nation. And so in this lifetime, I'm so honored that God would literally light a path for me to really be able to serve folks. But I also recognize we got a lot of work, more work to do, but to be able to root that in a legacy of a people who we are. In fact, I believe that we are the founders of democracy in this country. We make democracy be real, and we have to continue that fight. So thank you for all that you do to feed the hearts, spirits, and minds of our people, and actually to physically feed our people. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for the NAN Network. I'm grateful for every single person who has prayed, who has registered somebody to vote, who has stood in the background, whether they were a poll watcher or poll worker. We are all in this struggle. The struggle continues. So thank you.
Let me say, as I get you this award, that I am clearly also saying that you've shown that you have fought not only racism, but the whole monogamy that has dominated. Because you're a woman that had to deal with sexism and racism, even in the movement. And I think that Amelia Boykin, who never gets the credit she was due, because she was on that bridge that day. It was not just Hosea and John Lewis, but Amelia Boykin. One of my treasured memories is going across that bridge, standing behind Barack Obama, but holding her wheelchair as we went across that bridge. We didn't get a chance to give Ms. Boynton an award, but thank God we got a chance to give Natasha Brown, who has that spirit of Ms. Boykin, and keeps it going and makes Selma proud, makes Georgia proud, makes the U.S. proud, makes freedom fighters all over the world proud. To you, we give you this award.
Thank you. I'm honored. Thank you.
All right.
Our next Visionary Award honoree, Cindy Marisol Benavides, is a Honduran American immigrant who has experienced the American dream and now devotes her career to public service, ensuring that countless young people, women, and immigrants have the same opportunity. She is currently Chief Executive Officer for the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, the oldest Hispanic civil rights organization in the country. She is the first Latina to lead LULAC in 90 years and the youngest leader to lead a national legacy organization in the country. She started informal organizing in high school with her first global project focused on raising funds and supplies when Hurricane Mitch devastated Honduras. Cindy's work is a reflection of the values instilled by her immigrant parents. Her commitment to public service is influenced by her paternal and maternal grandparents. Cindy is mostly known for her ability to connect with the community and mobilize around key issues with a long-term strategy goal in mind. Her current focus is increasing representation of Latinos at all levels and ensuring that the Latino community harnesses their own advocacy and voting power.
It is my honor to present a Martin Luther King Day Award 2021 to Cindy Benavides. Cindy is a Honduran American immigrant who experienced the American dream and now devotes her career to public service. Went to an HBCU, has become one of our leading civil rights activists, and believes and practices every day the intersectional fight of bringing together communities for human rights and civil rights. She's currently the Chief Executive Officer for the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, the oldest Hispanic civil rights organization in the country. And LULAC works to advance the economic conditions, educational attainment, and political influence, housing, health, and civil rights of Hispanic Americans. And they have partnered with National Action Network down through the years. But because during these troubling and tumultuous times, Cindy and LULAC has remained steadfast and has given a sense of stability to the movement. There are those activists that come and go that are seasonal. There are others that are episodic, that if something happens, they react. But then there are those that are solid, that keep going. And that's what Dr. King did. He was one that was consistent from the Montgomery boycott all the way to when he was leading and supporting the garbage workers in Memphis when he was assassinated. And Cindy comes in that tradition of getting up every day, whether it's a front page story issue or whether it will be ignored by the media at all, but fighting for justice, fighting for fairness, and fighting for the Latino community and all other communities. She's been there, and LULAC's been there, whether the civil rights victims were Black, white, Asian, American, Native American, LGBTQ. So even though they are the dominant historic organization in the Hispanic community, they are there on the front lines with all of us, as Dr. King taught us, which is why on this King Day, in this hour of such challenge, we proudly give our Martin Luther King Day Award at this breakfast to Cindy Benavides. Thank you for accepting this, Cindy, and thank you for being you.
Thank you so much. To our dear friend and civil rights leader, Reverend R. Sharpton, the entire distinguished leadership of the National Action Network, and esteemed allies in the struggle for social justice, I am deeply humbled and grateful for this honor. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer for LULAC, LULAC is the oldest and largest national Latino civil rights organization in the country. We are 92 years young this February 17th. As is the case with everyone else here, we share a passion to serve. Our work is not about us and will never be about us. It is about those we seek to uplift, about our community. It is about those we are called upon to defend and to protect by uplifting their stories and their journeys, by making sure that the realities of our people, nuestra gente, nuestro pueblo, is uplifted every single day. And as importantly, it's about having the courage to take action about the realities that our people of color, a rising new majority, are living every single day, to demonstrate the convictions, the values, and the beliefs that we hold so dearly to our hearts. Such was the case of a historic event that I was immensely proud to join with you this past year. It seems like it was an eternity ago, but the Commitment March on Washington was only this past August, and yet it feels like so much has changed in the world even since then. I want you to just think about what just happened a few days ago, when not far from the grounds where we stood this past summer, where great civil rights leaders of this struggle for justice can still be seen and heard, and their souls can be felt. A mob of destructive domestic terrorists attempted to overthrow our very democracy. Theirs was not a protest, and they were not protesters. They were and are motivated by a blind xenophobic and racist hatred against the other being us. But we must not be distracted from that important work that still lies ahead, and to fulfill the promise of our founders, peacefully, non-violently, to call our institutions and those in power to make sure we hold them accountable, because the promise that are held within the principles of the Constitution are still not fulfilled. And we must not forget the threat that still exists. There are those who desecrate with their actions the very cry for justice and freedom from oppression, expressed by the millions of votes recently cast at the ballot box. These insurrectionists who stormed the US Capitol were willing to commit open acts of violence on a scale not witnessed in modern times at the very seat of power in our United States of America. Yet we are not deterred. We are not discouraged, and we will not be denied. We are more inspired, more empowered, more united than ever since the very days of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, when Dr. King spoke the words, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And those great words still echo. They resound more strongly than ever with every beat of our hearts. And if we, as our predecessors did in generations past, still cry out with our voices and our actions for the glorious, soaring feeling of freedom, true freedom, we know that we must act and that we must take action. We shall overcome any threat, any foe, any barrier placed before us by the strength imparted to us by God. And even though we walk through the valley, we know that our best days lie ahead. Yet, so many of us still yearn for that basic human dignity and respect for every man, woman, and child in America, irrespective of their skin color, their language, gender, religion, the person they love, or their place of birth. And we are consoled and encouraged because we have leaders like Reverend Sharpton, who every day wake up to fight for our communities, and so many other leaders across the country who are fighting for our communities and for the soul and spirit of our country. And I'm gonna say, Reverend Sharpton, that our dignity is not for sale, and it doesn't have any price, nor will we cower in any fear any longer, not one more day. Instead, we have reclaimed our voices, and we know the power that we hold. And our greatest act of defiance has been achieved, our vote. Our greatest way to protest has been heard, our vote. And our greatest way to rise up to represent our community has been accomplished because we showed up and we voted. And now as we continue in the fight, because there's still so much fighting left ahead to build a better nation, as a collective community, I know that we can do it. It is my greatest privilege to live a purposeful life in service to others. And I thank God for my children and for my entire family, for my friends, for my colleagues, for leaders who have walked to pave the way for so many of us. I'm so encouraged that I know that we will continue to work together in the future. This honor is one that I will treasure forever. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to continue working every day to be worthy of it, and know that I never dreamt when I stepped into the campus of Virginia State University that one day I would be fighting for mi gente, for mi pueblo, for our people, making sure that we are defending, protecting, empowering, and building the next generation of leaders to take the helm and to make sure we continue this legacy established by Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton, for this honor. I accept it with gratitude. Un millón de gracias.
Well, it is my honor. And after you heard us speak, you know why. We wanted to honor her because she deserves it. She personified keeping the dream. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton. It's deeply appreciated. I am honored and humbled and grateful.
Now, please welcome Tyleek McMillan, National Director of Youth and College, Policy Advisor and Tech Fellow for National Action Network.
My name is Tyleek McMillan, and I have the honor of serving as the National Youth Director for the National Action Network Youth and College Division. And today I am thrilled to be joined by Yolanda Renee King, the granddaughter of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. As you all may know, Yolanda and I spoke at the Commitment March in Washington convened by NAN last August. And Yolanda really championed her grandfather's voice and provided a sweeping vision of what our generation can accomplish. Today, as we honor your grandfather, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., today is a special day not only for the world and those who fight for social and racial justice, but this day has to be special for his legacy, his family. So I'm so
certainly is.
Yolanda, how are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing good. Excited to have this discussion with you. My first question would be, what does this holiday in honor of your grandfather mean to you?
Well, growing up and even now, my parents have taught me that this holiday is a day of service. So we're always volunteering or going to events, and we're giving back to the community because my grandparents really believed in the power of serving and helping others. And we want to carry out that legacy. We see this day as a giving back community, maybe rather than what most people may see it as a day, of course, of celebrating my grandfather, but also, maybe they see it as a day, maybe as like a extra long weekend. We see it as a day of work, a day of service, a day of giving back. And we really try to, we do it, and yeah. And so that's what my parents have taught me growing up, and that's what my grandparents stood for.
That's right. It's a day on, not a day off. And I think that's what the day is all about. And I think as you look at the rich legacy of your grandparents, like, what about their legacy like really stands out to you? What inspires you to keep going that you can pull from as you think about their rich legacy?
Well, there's a lot of things that I take from them, a lot of things that I admire, a lot of things that I want to continue doing. One being their bravery, their motivation to keep on going, because many people think that these times are, and they are, it's really sad and they're really bad, but I couldn't imagine living in times like that, times where, and they just always had faith, and I just admire that about them, and I try to carry that myself, I look at, and I kind of analyze my grandparents' speeches and almost into my own words, I use their quotes, I listen to their quotes, and honestly, as I've started to get older, I've started to learn the significance of the civil rights movement and what they do, because I think as I was younger, I knew, of course, that this was important. It was a huge part of my family, and it's a part of almost all families, especially in the African American community. And I, I I guess I just, as I got older, realized the significance. And in a way, I don't want to say this, but in a way, I kind of did take that for granted, or I knew, oh, everybody says my grand, but like when you see it with your own eyes and when you realize it, that's a whole new level. So their speaking and their bravery, just like if they could do it, and it was in this situation, then I could do it. And now that's helped motivate me, their bravery.
That's right. They had bravery, true bravery. And
Yes.
now was really our time.
And they also had courage, because I bet you there were times where they felt nervous or afraid, and they still decided to keep on going, keep on marching, and keep on working, even with all the threats and all the danger. And I just really admire that about them, because courage is not easy. Like, because you are brave, I think it's more significant to have courage rather than being brave, because that shows, even though you're nervous, even though you have a fear, you push yourself out of your comfort zone, you make change. And I think that's what activism is about, using your platform for good. And they use their platform for good, and they also risk their platform. And it's, in a way, it's came with a reward as well, but we don't just do it for a reward.
That's right. And we all can pull from that advice and pull from the many lessons that your grandparents have taught. And I think as we look at, we look at other young people who want to be involved in this moment. I mean, at the march, you spoke about, we are the generation to end systemic racism now and forever. We are the generation to end police brutality now and forever. So what advice would you give to other young people like yourself, or, even my age, who want to get involved in this moment? What advice would you tell them?
Like I said, activism is about using your platform for good. And my advice for young people is, not everybody has to be maybe an advocate or a good speaker. You can use music. I don't know if many people know this, but my grandmother actually, in order to raise money during the civil rights movement, did freedom concerts. And so you can use, if you have a beautiful voice, you can use your voice to sing. Maybe you're an artist, you can use your art to paint and to show art. Art was a big part of the civil rights movement. You can write, like at Maya Angelou, and all these and her poetry, and you can write poetry. So use your talent and find a way to use it for good. Maybe you can organize, maybe you're really good at sports, and you can organize some sort of sit-in, or like we saw with the sports teams here, and you can raise awareness for your team, and have some sort of demonstration with them, or even organizing a march, or even starting a club, or looking at marches or demonstrations.
That's right. And there's not one way to do this thing. And I always tell people that it doesn't take, you to be the next, Dr. King, or the next Coretta Scott, or you're the next Al Sharpton, but it takes, you being yourself, and you standing in your own purpose and your own passion, because this is like a big machine. If everybody does their part, I believe it'll all come together to work for the good. Last question I have for you would be, a lot of times we hear your grandfather's and your grandmother's quotes. One of your quotes that I live by your grandfather is, it's always right. The time is always right to do what is right. And so what quote would you say, as we close out, what is your favorite quote from your grandfather, and why would you say that is your favorite quote?
Well, picking your favorite quote from him is like picking a favorite book from him. So, and I think that each quote has an answer. So I never really, it varies, it changes. Like one of them is actually, rioting is the language of the unheard, especially with what's going on and this summer and as you know, the incident and the attack. And there are just so many, and so yeah. So
There's so many there's so many to choose from. As you said, it's like picking your favorite, his favorite one of his books. And so I thank you so much for taking the time and for speaking with me and encouraging other young people to get involved. As you said, there's not one particular way to do this, but if you be you be yourself, and you're passionate about what you do, we all can come together to play our part, because we have an obligation to speak up when things are wrong, and together we can make a difference, and that's what we can do. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
And as we celebrate the King holiday, thank you so much.
Thank you.
At the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March, Kavanaugh, who lives in Gaithersburg with his mother, was focused on helping the local community in the Maryland suburb. He created care packages with toiletries and groceries for elderly people using his own savings of birthday and Christmas money. Eventually, fueled by donations, he and his mother opened a food pantry at a nearby warehouse that a logistics company offered to let them use. He even got praise from people in high places, including Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, Governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. The list goes on. With the success of the food pantry, Kavanaugh, who was in the second grade, decided over the summer to extend his reach beyond the Gaithersburg community, shifting his efforts to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, home to some of the poorest communities in the country. As you all may know, National Action Network in our efforts across the country gave out 1.8 million meals through partnership. And I was so inspired that Kavanaugh, at just 8 years old, thought it not robbery to give of himself, his time, and his money to give back. And that is the exact reason why we are so thrilled to present him with the MLK Youth Award. You know, Dr. King once said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. And Kavanaugh, you are serving, and we're so excited to present you with this award.
I want to sincerely thank the National Action Network for this incredible award and for this opportunity, because it is through your work that kids like me have the chance to stand up and speak out. I'd also like to dedicate this award to Gianna Floyd. She is someone I look up to, and the activism that her father's death sparked is something I will never forget. I'm 8 years old, but I don't let my age stop me. In fact, I use that to prove to the world that us kids can and will have an impact, no matter if we're 4, 8, or 16. I'd like to take the next few minutes to share my story with you, in the hopes that it will spark a fire within you to use your passion, your voice, and your dreams for the future to help me and all the kids in this country rise up and be leaders to change the world. My story starts when I was 4.5 years old, and I was being bullied at school for being smart and for looking different than the other kids. It was then that I first felt a darkness inside of me that I couldn't get rid of or explain to my mom. But on the bathroom floor one day, I did a brave thing, and I told my mom what was happening to me. And in those tears that we cried together, she promised me that she would help me turn that darkness I was feeling into a massive light of inspiration. Since then, I've gone on to speak to mayors, to county council members, to state senators, even to the House of Representatives. I've gone on to use my life savings to make care packs for senior citizens and launch a full community pantry to help over 13,000 people. But not just in my community, but also in the poorest community in the nation, the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And I don't do this work for me. I do this to show all of the other kids like me that their voices will be heard and their ideas have value and that their lives matter. I know we talk a lot about flattening the pandemic curve, but I want to raise awareness that there are so many other curves that touch all areas of our lives that we need to erase. The curve of prejudice, of racism, of poverty, of bullying, of youth suicide, and of food insecurity. But I'm not here today because of me. I'm here because of you. You have a light inside of you that the world needs right now. You are a part of a tribe of change makers who are ready to stand up and make change happen in the world. You are valuable in this fight to help create the future that we all deserve. And as Dr. King said, it's always right to do what's right. I'm 8 years old, and I'm going to make the world a better place for all of us. I hope you join me because we need each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and continue to do the great work. We know that great things are to come. Congratulations.
Our Labor Leader Award honoree is Dr. Millicent Gorham, the Executive Director of the National Black Nurses Association. She has been in this role since 1995 with 35 years of government relations experience. Sitting on multiple prestigious boards and advisory boards for health, last year she received the American Academy of Nursing Award for Outstanding Leadership. The exponential growth in the diversity of the general population in the United States is not reflected in the healthcare profession, especially for Black nurses. Black nurses are critical for providing Black communities with better health care. Compared to their white counterparts, they are more likely to practice in underserved areas that comprise a large percentage of Black families and are more likely to accept patients who are covered by Medicaid. Improving the access to care is only one dimension of how they serve their community. They also have been linked to improving the quality of care that African Americans receive. The National Black Nurses Association was organized in 1971 and represents over 300,000 African American registered nurses, licensed vocational practical nurses, nursing students, and retired nurses from the U.S., Eastern Caribbean, and Africa, with over 114 charter chapters in over 34 states. Their mission is to serve as the voice for Black nurses and diverse populations, ensuring equal access to professional development, promoting educational opportunities, and improving health. In the midst of a pandemic where people of color die at a higher rate, today we honor our essential Black healthcare workers.
Despite the hardships and health risks, millions of essential frontline workers continue to do jobs during COVID-19's pandemic. These hardworking heroes are keeping us safe. And we are proud to present the Martin Luther King Day Labor Leader Award to one of their leaders, the leader in the nursing area who has done such a tremendous job at tremendous risk. And that is Dr. Millicent Gorham. Dr. Gorham is the Executive Director of the National Black Nurses Association. National Black Nurses Association represents approximately 200,000 African American nurses from the USA, Canada, Eastern Caribbean, and Africa, with 115 chartered chapters nationwide. Since its inception, improving the health of African Americans through the provision of cultural, competent healthcare services and community-based health programs has been the cornerstone of the National Black Nurses Association. And you must remember that during this pandemic, African Americans were disproportionately infected and disproportionately died, which meant that the Black nurses, represented by Dr. Gorham and the National Black Nurses Association, had disproportionate impact, disproportionate exposure, disproportionate work. And that's why, in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King, we want to present Dr. Gorham this award that our labor leaders in National Action Network chose. She is the Shiro of this year, 21 Martin Luther King Labor Award. Thank you, Dr. Gorham.
Thank you, Reverend Sharpton, for this high honor from the National Action Network. I am extremely grateful to receive this wonderful award. 2020 was a tough year for all of us, and particularly a tough year for nurses serving on the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic. So many of you call nurses heroes. They are heroes. They are champions for their patients, for their nurse colleagues and physicians and respiratory therapists and pharmacists, and all hospital associates and EMTs. But they are human. They have been severely impacted by this pandemic. One nurse said that you cannot begin to imagine what I have seen and heard. I'm scared I'm going to take COVID home. I'm tired. I'm beyond exhausted. And I'm supposed to go to work every day like nothing has happened. I'm not getting any more pay for these long hours. I am finally getting the much needed PPEs. I am grateful to have a hospital chaplain who is listening to my fears and anxiety. This nurse is your hero, your champion. The nurses just marshal through, making sure that we stay as healthy as possible. These are MBNA members. MBNA recognized that nurses need help to keep them mentally healthy. So we have partnered with Pfizer to provide free, confidential mental health counseling services through licensed clinicians and offering webinars and podcasts. Also, we partnered with Pfizer to educate nurses on the importance of getting their flu and pneumonia vaccinations. MBNA is working with Johnson & Johnson to educate nurses around vaccine hesitancy and vaccine acceptance. And we are working with Johnson & Johnson on providing tools to keep nurses mentally healthy and resilient. MBNA is working with the Black Coalition Against COVID, which the National Action Network is a partner, to provide the scientific information on COVID-19. MBNA is working with the Ad Council to educate our nation about vaccine acceptance. Nurses are trusted partners in the communities where they live, work, play, and worship. Community residents turn to nurses for advice. Through the 108 chapters in 34 states, MBNA offers health education and health screening. The MBNA members have been integral in educating community residents about clinical trials. Our chapters are working with communities around food insecurity and access to prescription drugs. Our chapters are educating our communities about the NIH All of Us research program and precision medicine. MBNA recruits young people to go into the noble profession of nursing. This pandemic has taught the nation that we need more nurses. So after a long 8 to 12 hour shift, tired but not broken, the MBNA members marched in streets across America and marched at the August March on Washington against racial and social injustice. This is MBNA. These are heroes and champions. So join us in Dallas for the MBNA 50th anniversary. Again, National Action Network, Reverend Al Sharpton, on behalf of the MBNA President, Dr. Martha A. Dawson, MBNA members, and nurses worldwide, I thank you for this prestigious honor.
Well, thank you. God bless you. And we are forever indebted to our Black nurses that despite the danger, they went out there and saved many lives and comforted many families for the lives they could not save. Thank you and God bless you.
Our first Peace and Freedom Award honoree is Miss Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is a New York Times bestselling author of Our Time Is Now and Lead from the Outside. She is an entrepreneur and political leader. After serving as minority leader in the Georgia House of Representatives, Abrams became the 2018 Democratic nominee for governor of Georgia. Over the course of her career, she has founded multiple organizations devoted to voting rights, training and hiring young people of color, and tackling social issues. Dedicated to civil engagement, her most recent endeavors include launching Fair Fight to ensure every American has a voice in our election system, Fair Count to ensure accuracy in the census and greater participation in civic engagement, and the Southern Economic Advancement Project, a public policy initiative to broaden economic power and build equity in the South. She serves on the board of advisors for Climate Power 2020, the Center for American Progress, and the Women's National Basketball Players Association, and is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
As most of you know, I started at 13 years old becoming youth director in New York of Dr. King's organization the year he was killed. Growing up in the King movement in the North, trying to keep it alive in the North, I studied that Dr. King said there are two types of leaders. There are thermometers and there are thermostats. Thermometers judge the temperature in the room. Thermostats change the temperature in the room, make it hotter or colder based on what is needed. The thermostat that has, in my judgment and the judgment of National Action Network, changed the temperature of politics as it is conducted in this country for the last several years is our 2021 MLK Day honoree with Dr. Anthony Fauci, and that is Stacey Abrams. I don't have to tell you of her work, not only in Georgia, but around the country in registering voters and going in areas that we used to not go in, and talking to people that we felt couldn't be reached, and expanding the democracy, and doing it without becoming extreme, but doing the hard work, doing the work that makes change come about. The win in Georgia of Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff is only a mere result of some of her work, because I think many other districts were flipped, not just for partisan politics, but for a direction in this country, a direction that we feel Dr. King would have been proud of. Because National Action Network grew out of the King movement, we are very serious and take real deliberation on those that we award. And this was a unanimous decision to make our thermostat award this year to one who personifies the principles of Dr. King in the 21st century. It is my honor to present that award to the one and only, our sister beloved, Stacey Abrams. Thank you for being with us, Stacey.
Thank you so much for the award. Thank you for the kindness. I know we are entering this day of celebration, of remembrance of Dr. King's legacy. We have these twin pillars of emotion, the joy of knowing that we have once again overcome voter suppression and the tactics that would make us believe we are less than. But we confront an insurrection where those who fomented domestic terrorism are now urging us to forget it because they'd like to get back to normal. My mission, my work, my upbringing was about making certain that normal always includes everyone, that it is not the province of one community, it's not the province of one nation, it is the province of all. And our responsibility is to constantly work our hands to build the world we want to be a part of. In 2018, when I did not become governor, I created 3 organizations. I created Fair Fight, an organization whose sole purpose is to defend our democracy by defending voters, by defeating voter suppression, and by encouraging voter mobilization. I created Fair Count because the 2020 census, it was not a once-in-a-decade intrusion in our privacy. It is a 10-year plan for our survival or our demise. And the Southern Economic Advancement Project, a think tank that focuses on translating progressive policy into Southern. Because we know that if we can lift up the South, if we can advance the needs of the South, then we find solutions to challenges across this country. In 2020 and 2021, we saw much of that work come to fruition. We launched South Strong, an initiative across 12 Southern states that will be defending the South, demanding that in the wake of Southern governors who seem to have no concern for the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on our communities, we will be fighting to make certain that the South gets its fair share and that we move forward, not backwards, as COVID relief becomes a part of our conversation and as COVID recovery becomes a part of our economy. Fair Count helped to ensure that across this country, more communities of color were included in the U.S. Census, and that despite their best efforts, the Trump administration was unable to weaponize the census against our communities as he intended. But there's still much work to do as we head into redistricting, as we decide not only who goes to Congress, but who oversees our children's schools, who determines our city leadership, and how our counties and our state legislatures operate. But I think what most people know about is the work of Fair Fight, which was launched in Georgia, but was structured in 2019 through Fair Fight 2020 to have a national reach. We operated in Wisconsin, helping make certain that voters in Milwaukee did not have to choose between their lives and their votes. We worked in Pennsylvania and in Michigan. We were down in Arizona, and we were across the country in states like Alabama and Mississippi, because building the kind of infrastructure we need for progress takes time. And that's why Fair Fight 2020 started its work in August of 2019, and we're still doing that work. Across 20 states, we are investing in the work and in the mission of ensuring a fair democracy. And nowhere has it been more clear that this work can work than here in Georgia. Our support in 2020 of making certain that voters had access to the right to vote meant that we had record turnout, where we not only saw a dramatic increase in Black voters, we saw dramatic increases among Latino voters, Asian American voters, Native American voters were included in the conversation, and young people helped change the future of our state. But Black voters in particular were essential to that victory. And when we moved into January, we knew that this was not simply about winning a couple of races. This was about setting an agenda and setting a course for our nation. And I am so proud of the work that was done in Georgia to ensure that we had record turnout, record participation, and history-making elections, where we sent the first Black senator from the state of Georgia, and we sent the first Jewish senator from the state of Georgia. But our work is not done, and that became no more clear than the afternoon of June 6th. When celebrations were rolling through our country, it came to a brutal halt because of the domestic terrorism of those who refuse to believe in the sanctity of the right to vote for all and in the fullness of our democracy. And so I accept this award because of my commitment to keeping that fight going. It is a fight not against anyone, but for all of us. It is a fight that says that democracy only works when we work for it, when we fight for it, when we demand it. And it's a fight that I believe that Nan has been a part of for so many years, and I'm honored to be in this fight with you. So thank you so much for this award.
Well, thank you. On behalf of the Board of Directors and members of National Action Network, we virtually present you this award, and we are certainly partnering with you as we continue to fight to save this democracy. Stacey Abrams.
Thank you, sir.
Our next Peace and Freedom Award honoree is Sir Hilary Beckles. Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is a distinguished Barbadian historian, academic international thought leader, United Nations committee official, and global public activist in the field of social justice and minority empowerment. He serves as the 8th Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. and chairman of the Caribbean Community Reparations Commission. He is a global activist for reparatory justice, human equality, and empowerment for the global African diaspora. In 2001, Sir Beckles led the Barbados delegation to the World Conference Against Racism. With Sir Beckles' advice, 15 Caribbean nations came together and formed the CARICOM Reparations Commission to coordinate the Caribbean government's policy positions on the global reparatory justice conversation and globally promote reparations for genocide, enslavement, and colonization. He has lectured extensively in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia, publishing over 100 peer-reviewed essays in scholarly journals and over 13 books on subjects ranging from Atlantic and Caribbean history, gender relations in the Caribbean, sport development, and popular culture. Under Sir Beckles' guidance, the Center for Reparation Research at UWI has established and led the implementation of CARICOM's Reparatory Justice Program. In 2007, he received a knighthood as Commander Knight of St. Andrew, the highest national honor in Barbados. We know that our fight for justice is a global one, and the history of slavery and racism affects us all over the world. As we continue to push for justice and champion legislation like H.R. 40 here in the United States, we are grateful for the groundbreaking work of visionaries like Sir Hilary Beckles.
Dr. Martin Luther King holiday ought to be celebrated and commemorated along the lines that Dr. King gave his life. And Dr. King was not just one that fought for civil rights in the United States. He fought for human rights all over the world. He was there at the celebration of Kwame Nkrumah becoming president of Ghana. He traveled throughout Africa. He raised the issues of people all over the world, people of color. In his last book, Where Do We Go From Here?, he addressed global issues. So every year, as we have National Action Network's MLK holiday breakfast in Washington, we look for someone that has personified in their own work, in their own life, the global fight for human rights, human dignity, particularly in the African diaspora. And it is no doubt about the fact that Sir Hilary Beckles has been one in that tradition, I would say unequaled in the present African diaspora, that of those of us that are still among us. He is, of course, the Vice Chancellor at the University of West Indies. Ebonie has given his background, but let me say anyone that is familiar with academia, anyone that is a serious student of activism in the academic world, in the global struggle, anyone that has a serious tendency to study the struggles and the interconnecting of the struggles around the world knows of Sir Beckles and his work. And anyone knows anything about crickets knows about him too. He covers many areas, and it is our honor that he would accept this award this year and allow us to honor him, and through him honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and what he meant to the world. It is my honor as president of National Action Network to give our Martin Luther King Jr. 2021 Global Award to Sir Hilary Beckles. Sir Beckles.
Reverend Al, a mentor to all of us in the human and civil rights movement. I thank you. I am humbled. I am honored to have been considered within the context of the legacy of Dr. King. The forces that bring us together, Reverend Al, are deeply embedded in our families and our communities. And allow me to say, I was raised by my grandmother when my parents went off to England from the Caribbean in the 50s to work in the factories, to look for work to feed their children. And I was a working class boy raised by my grandmother, whose name was Pastor King. And she was the Pentecostal pastor in our community. And I was known as Pastor King's grandson. I had no name. I was just Pastor King's grandson. And in our home, you know, in our little home, there was the image of Dr. King and the image of Jesus Christ. And those were the only images in our house when I was a child growing up. So I grew up under the ministry of Pastor King and Dr. King. So I received a double dose of ministerial upbringing in the search of justice, looking out for the interests of the poor, committing your professional life to the development of the oppressed people, and knowing that our people were placed in a deep hole by Western modernity. And all of us who had the blessings of the capacity to do research, to write, to speak, our task has been to dig our people out of that hole and put them on a level playing field where they can pursue their God-given talents as a race, as an ethnicity. And this has been my life issue, Reverend Al, university, to study history and economics, because I wanted to know the history of our people. And I wanted to know the economics to advance their interests. And Dr. King for us was the perfect balance of that model. How to be a theologian, how to be a philosopher, how to be a political theorist, but at the same time, how to be a mobilizer, an organizer, and get out on the streets in the communities and get the work done. So that was the model, Reverend Al, that my generation grew up with. That was the model that has framed my own views of the world. I have been involved, Reverend Al, in the reparatory justice movement. In 2001 at Durban, when we met, I said, the reparatory justice movement is going to be the greatest political movement of the 21st century. That all of the people of the world who have suffered enslavement, colonization, they are going to rise up for justice. And this movement is going to be a global movement. And we look to Dr. King's legacy for the model, for the template of this movement. Go for potential and looking at the economics of development as well as the sociology of justice. So Dr. King was our template, and he remains for us the guiding light in this global reparatory justice movement. And so I am honored, Reverend Al, to accept this honor with humility. I do so by also celebrating my fellow honorees, and as an academic, I should say thanks to Dr. Fauci, my fellow honoree, for placing the science before the politics to save lives. One of my tasks, Reverend Al, as a university leader here, has been to work with our governments to put the science before the politics, and we have done so. Very proud of how the Caribbean people have been able to reduce the infection rates, suppress death rates, and relatively speaking, the people of the Caribbean have done well by placing the science before the politics, and our university has had a great deal to do with that. So on behalf of my colleagues at the University of the West Indies, who have given me to participate in this and the human and civil rights yourself, Reverend Al, I accept and with gratitude. Thank you very much, as I also celebrate the Martin Luther King family on this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Beckles. It is our honor to present him this award. Thank you. God bless you and strengthen you in your work.
Hey family, show us that you're still tuning in. Use the hashtag NanMLK21 on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for a chance to win a Denny's gift card or a brand new Apple Watch Series 6 sponsored by our friends at Stars. We will announce the winner after the breakfast. Be sure to follow National Action Network and sign up for our listserv to see who wins.
National Action Network started in March of 1991, meaning this is our 30th year. 30 years of social justice work, from direct action movements, from civil disobedience, to engaging in corporate suites, to pushing for financial services for our business people, for pushing for quality education and affordable health care. We've been on the forefront from the streets to the suites for 30 years. And part of what you do in the King tradition is be able to bring the wishes and dreams of those that are forgotten and marginalized to the seat of power and make them understand and hold them accountable. Over the last 3 decades, we've been able to do that at the highest form with 3 presidents of the United States coming to National Action Network to show the impact we've had. We've had President Bill Clinton come and speak at this breakfast that is now virtual. We've had, on 2 occasions, President Barack Obama come to National Action Network conventions as president. We had as vice president and then as candidate for president on 2 occasions, Joe Biden.
Don't you let anybody tell you that we can't all grow together. You just got to get rid of trickle down and go back to bottom up economics. Somebody asked me the other day, I was doing an interview and said, what are you most proud of? I said, I'm most proud of the fact that we had broadly shared prosperity for the first time in 50 years, because I think most people will do a good job in their own communities with their own families if they have a good job and a decent chance. And we moved literally 1,000 times as many people out of poverty in the 1990s as in the 12 previous years. And we had the bottom 20% of the income groups, income increased slightly higher than the top 20% in percentage terms. 20 times what they had before. We can do this again. I want you to believe that. We can do this again. And unlike, I got, and I'm grateful for what Reverend Sharpton said, but the truth is that all we got to do is have enough votes in Congress and we'll get this done. You got to have a majority in both houses in the White House and you get it done, and we will be amazed. Not because all of us politicians are geniuses, but because the American people will do the right thing if they have something to look forward to when they get up in the morning. In the most conservative states in America, there's been a rebellion against gutting the school budgets. People finally said, oh, this is not about culture, this is about my kid's brain and my children's future. So I want you to be happy today. There are no permanent victories or defeats in public affairs. You got to suit up and show up and push back every single day. But you just remember this. You don't have to give up your culture, and neither do the people who disagree with you. They just got to get over themselves enough to realize that what we have in common is more important than our interesting differences. We're still the best positioned country in the world for the 21st century because of our diversity. Addition is better than subtraction. Multiplication is better than division. I could fill this room with the studies that prove diverse groups make better decisions than lone geniuses. So I want you to leave here with energy. Those of us who are older now have the gift of time. When I leave you, I'm going to see my friend Vernon Jordan, who's fighting to recover from a terrible fall he had. It doesn't take long to live a life. And in that time, you owe it to the past you had and the future children deserve to be on the side of vigilance and not neglect, but do not despair. For more than 225 years, everybody who's bet against this country has wound up losing money because of what Dr. King said about the arc of the universe being long, but it bends toward justice. He was eloquent and brief, Reverend. So he left out a very important part. You got to do the bending.
I want to say, first of all, thank you to your leader, Reverend Al Sharpton. Give him a big round of applause. And I appreciate the idea of being an action president, although I do also have style. I just want to point that out. I know it's not about it, but I do have it. Al's not the only guy with style. If voting is denied to the many, we risk ending up stuck year after year with special interest policies that benefit a fortunate few, and injustice perpetuates inequality. But remember, just as injustice perpetuates inequality, justice opens up opportunity. And as infuriating as efforts to roll back hard-earned rights can be, the trajectory of our history has to give us hope. The story of America is a story of progress. No matter how often or how intensely that progress has been challenged, ultimately this nation has moved forward. As Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long. It bends towards justice. We move forward on civil rights, and we move forward on workers' rights, and we move forward on women's rights and disability rights and gay rights. We showed that when ordinary citizens come together to participate in this democracy we love, justice will not be denied. So the single most important thing we can do to protect our right to vote is to vote. I'm gonna make one last point here. We're going to have an attorney general that looks at all the laws that are being passed. We're going to have civic organizations that are making sure that state laws and local laws are doing what they're supposed to do. We will fight back whenever we see unfairly the franchise being challenged. But the truth is that for all these laws that are being put in place, the biggest problem we have is people giving up their own power, voluntarily not participating. The number of people who voluntarily don't vote, who are eligible to vote, dwarfs whatever these laws are put in place might do in terms of diminishing the voting rolls. So we can't treat these new barriers as an excuse not to participate. We can't use cynicism as an excuse not to participate. Sometimes I hear people saying, well, we haven't gotten everything we need. You know, we still have poverty. We still have problems. Of course, these things didn't happen overnight. When I was down in Texas, everybody's celebrating the day that the civil rights law was finally passed. Remember, there were decades in which people sacrificed and worked hard. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it happens as long as we don't purposely give our power away. Every obstacle put in our path should remind us of the power we hold in our hands each time we pull that lever or fill in that oval or touch that screen. We just have to harness that power. We've got to create a national network committed to taking action. We can call it the National Action Network. So I want you to go out there and redouble your efforts. Register more voters. Help more folks to get their rights. Get those souls to the polls. If they don't let you do it on Sunday, then do it on Tuesday instead. You can make a change. You do have the power. I've run my last election, but I need you to make sure that the changes that we started continue for decades to come. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you.
fact of the matter is that the bottom line is we have a lot to root out, but most of all, there's systematic racism that most of us whites don't like to acknowledge even exists. We don't even consciously acknowledge it, but it's been built into every aspect of our system. Because when your schools are substandard, when your houses are undervalued, when your car insurance costs more for no apparent reason, when poverty rates for black Americans is still twice that of white Americans, when Barack says if your name is Jamal and your name is Jim, and you have the same qualifications and Jim gets the job, there's something we have to admit, not you, we, white America has to admit, there's still a systematic racism. And it goes almost unnoticed by so many of us. When all that is surrounding us, is it any wonder that there is still that spirit of restlessness out there? How do we ensure that every American can live a life of dignity? How do we fulfill the promise that working people who still go to bed like my dad used to, staring at the ceiling, thinking, God, if I get prostate cancer, or if my wife gets breast cancer, we lose everything. We lose single biggest reason for bankruptcy. We lose everything. How can we stand by guaranteeing that every single American can get affordable health care and medications because your health shouldn't depend on the color of your skin or your zip code? But it does. One study found that there are 30 million US jobs waiting to be filled that don't need a college degree, a bachelor's degree. When I wrote for the president a year of study of the jobs of the future, right then and there were 100,000 factory jobs going unfilled for high tech because we didn't train people for those skills. The average salary, according to this study, is $55,000 a year. 30 million US jobs that don't require a bachelor's degree that pay $55,000 a year. Whether it's college, trade school, certificate apprenticeships, community colleges, 6-week coding programs, every single solitary child is capable of doing something consequential and filling these jobs. It's not rocket science. No, it really isn't. It's an absolute simple commitment. Folks, what the hell are we arguing about a $15 minimum wage for? Why is it even a question? No, real. Below that rate, you're below the poverty level. People working, busting their necks. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to eliminate, which you probably don't even realize, there's 40 million people out there who have to sign a non-compete agreement. You work for the equivalent of a Wendy's. You can't go to work, you can't compete and go to work for McDonald's if they pay you 5 cents more. The fact of the matter is that these are hourly jobs. People are having to sign non-compete agreements. What the heck are we doing? Folks, we need better public transportation and so much more that will literally change the lives of ordinary people, black, Hispanic, and some whites as well. Rev, I'm optimistic. The reason I am, and I'll end on this, is I know I was always referred to, as the mayor knows, as the White House optimist. I always kind of liked that. It made me look like I was the young guy. But they're longer than all of them. As my grandfather would say, I didn't fall off the turnip truck yesterday. But folks, new generation of millennials, those born after 1980, a study at Georgetown University showed not only are they the best educated, the most engaged, they are also the least prejudiced generation in American history. And they have been awakened, like my generation was by your father. They have been awakened. Ladies and gentlemen, over 60% of this millennial generation believe that increasing, not accepting, increasing diversity is good for them and good for America. That has never, ever happened in any polling in American history.
So we reached from the top of government to those that are at our Saturday rallies every Saturday in Harlem, showing that our reach is exactly what Dr. King taught, that we must be able to appeal to those in power, but bring them to those that they are empowered by, to have an agenda for everyone. 30 years, we have survived. Many groups, many grassroots organizations have not made it 10 years. We're here 30 years later, and we ain't got tired yet. If you want to know the best of National Action Network, I really couldn't tell you, because the best is still yet to come.
Now, please welcome Kyra Stevenson Valley, Policy Advisor and Health Equity Coordinator for National Action Network.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us as NAN celebrates MLK Jr. Day. To promote health and safety for the Black community against COVID-19, NAN has embarked on the largest survey of the African American community to date to gain a deeper understanding and insight into almost why 50% of Black people report that they will not take the vaccine. NAN partnered with Data Lingual Analytics, which is an African American-led data science research company, and we've partnered with the experts from Columbia University's Data Science Institute. We are really appreciative of all the responses we got. We've gotten over 6,000 responses, and a lot of those responses, people took the time to indicate that our guest today, Dr. Nuna Smith, is one of the trusted figures that they look to for information about COVID-19 and the virus. Dr. Nuna Smith is an American health professional. She, as of January 20th, will become the COVID-19 Task Force Health Equity Lead for the Biden administration. So we are deeply grateful to have her join us today. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I will just start with some of the questions. A large percentage of our survey respondents indicated that their reluctance to take the vaccine was from a concern that they have pre-existing conditions, including autoimmune diseases and allergies. About 62% of our survey respondents indicated that they were really concerned about that issue. So I was wondering how we might mitigate that and any responses you had around that.
Great. So, thank you. And thank you, of course, to the network for doing that robust survey. Those are the exact kind of data that we need. To your question, those 62% of people, they're asking absolutely the right question, right? Are these vaccines safe specifically for me? So first, I would advise just the regular disclaimer, please do reach out, talk to your own healthcare providers about the things that are specific to you. Hopefully your provider is someone who knows you well and who you trust, and you can have these conversations. But I will speak to this question generally, and we know the CDC has given us guidance on this. They have said very clearly that people with autoimmune disorders can, in fact, take the vaccines. And I think that's important, specifically these mRNA vaccines, and we'll have a chance to talk about that in a bit. One of the major considerations with autoimmune disorders, I think that's rightly raised, is really about whether or not your immune system can mount the robust response we'd want to see from the vaccines. So it's really less a question about safety and more a question of how well it would work. That question is often tied to the medications you take for autoimmune disorders. Again, why it's important to talk to your doctor about what makes sense for you or your provider. But sometimes just changing when you take the vaccine can actually make a big difference in terms of optimizing that benefit. So I'll turn to talk about allergies, because I think that's another great question. So when we think about the vaccines, the precautions tied to allergies, that applies to very, very few people. So the CDC has provided guidance for us on this as well. So if you have allergies, as I do, to foods and environmental triggers like pollen or animals, it's still safe to get vaccinated. I'm going to get vaccinated tomorrow. But people with a history of allergies to oral medications, a family history of severe allergic reactions, you can also still get vaccinated, right? So for whom is it not safe in terms of allergies? If you've ever had an immediate severe reaction to a vaccine before or any type of injectable medicine, that's really where we say pause, talk to your provider about that. But for the vast, number of people who are living with allergies, this is safe. And just to the last question, or the last point rather, like the pre-existing conditions, I want us to be really clear that, the pre-existing conditions that we know make a big difference in terms of getting vaccinated are the things like diabetes and heart disease, asthma, which I also live with. So it's critical for us to get vaccinated when we're living with those pre-existing conditions. We know it makes a big difference for our health.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I guess as a follow-up to that question, do we have enough information about the vaccine and its effects on the Black community? If you could talk a little bit about the clinical trials and how we're able to know that it's safe for us to take.
Perfect, great. So we do have a whole lot of information, I would start by saying, sadly, on the effects of COVID-19 on the Black community. And so just to sort of anchor us in those data and what that means for our families and our community, right? I fear people become numb to some of the statistics as we talk about them, what this actually means to say almost 4 times as likely in the Black community to end up hospitalized, almost 3 times as likely to die from COVID-19. So what does that mean? 1 in 735 Black Americans has died from COVID-19. If you think about our representation in the population, around 44 million, there's a lot of parents, siblings, neighbors, loved ones that we've lost. So I think we always have to begin our conversation. Sort of why is there the urgency of now to have a conversation about vaccines and vaccinations? It's because COVID-19 is decimating our communities in particular. So, the question about the vaccination, I think that's a very fair question to ask what we know. And we do. What we know in terms of the clinical trials, for example, Pfizer and Moderna, so those are the 2 that have been authorized for use. In those late stage trials, there was about 10% representation. This is, 75,000 participants in those trials. So when we say 10% of the people participating in those trials were Black, those are significant numbers. And I'm grateful for their participation. And what we see when we look at those sub-analyses, that's how we ask that question. We find that the vaccines perform the same, just as safe and effective for Black Americans as for everybody else in the trial. So we should feel very confident about that.
That's good. That's comforting. And one of the things I've heard a lot just through conversations with my friends is you haven't had anyone die from the vaccine, but a lot of us are dying from COVID-19. So that is really grounding. Another question that came up a lot and a concern that came up a lot through the surveys, why should we trust the government with the vaccine based on past and current behavior around racism?
Yeah. So absolutely. And we know, this is real, right? Centuries of structural racism have decimated our communities, really put us at great disadvantage. And the government has been all too often an active player in that. The incoming President-elect Biden has said unequivocally that Black Americans, other people of color in this country, have not always been treated with the dignity, the honesty, the respect that frankly is deserved by their government as well as by the scientific community. We all know that sort of distrust that many people come to this conversation with, has been earned over time. And that this isn't all about history, it's about now as well. So at its core, the decision about getting vaccinated, we know is about trust. So I appreciate that question, right? Where should we be placing our trust? And I place mine, and I think we should place our trust in science and evidence and data. So I want to be clear that the processes that got us to where we are today with these 2 authorized vaccines, Those processes occurred without political interference. This is very important, without political interference. They're open, transparent. I trust those scientists who work tirelessly to get us here today. So the scientists who've led this process, they've all agreed these vaccines are safe, they're effective. In terms of making sure that the vaccines are easily acceptable for everyone, right? So including for Black people, including for communities where it's been hardest hit, we have to do that work. And we have to make sure that when you're ready to say yes to getting vaccinated, that there aren't barriers that stand in the way. So this is what we know. The vaccines are safe, they're effective, right? The processes have been transparent. I have confidence in them. And we know at the end of the day that getting vaccinated is what will save our lives and our families' lives.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate what you mentioned about being able to access the vaccine once you're ready to take it. A lot of our survey respondents did mention that they're reluctant to take it now. They want to wait and see a little longer, but they're worried that if they don't take it as right now in the rollout, that they won't have the opportunity to take it down the line. So I was wondering if you could speak a bit to the distribution of the vaccine and any plans that your team has to make sure that that is equitable and accessible through our community.
Yes, thank you. This is the top priority of incoming administration. President-elect Biden has repeatedly said that the vaccine distribution needs to be efficient and equitable. Right? So we have to think with intentionality, and we are making the plans for this. This is critical, right? When you're ready to take the vaccination, it has to be convenient, right? It has to be free. We know that there shouldn't be administrative costs that get in the way of people taking the vaccine. We have to keep in mind the reality of things like pharmacy deserts. So many of our communities really don't have immediate access, right? And so whereas a lot of folks may get their vaccinations typically at their neighborhood pharmacy, we have to make sure that we have other plans in place, be they sort of mobile outreach, standing up vaccination, sites and centers where people know in their neighborhoods and communities. That has to be important. We have to think about things like transportation and make sure there aren't transportation barriers as well. But the federal government incoming is serious about this, right? And so we will work with states and local municipalities and others on making sure that the plans for access and distribution are equitable.
Perfect. And I think a long way in getting people to feel a little bit more comfortable is knowing what's in this vaccine. And I saw a lot of people say, we're going to get COVID-19 from the vaccine. So can you explain to me? I'm a policy advisor. I'm not a health worker. I'm not a scientist. Is there a way in layman's terms that you can let us know what's in these vaccines and can I get COVID-19 from it?
Great question. So if you looked at the ingredients, as we all do, like in our kitchen, it's a very simple list. All right. So just 4 things. There is the mRNA or the messenger RNA. So that's the thing that we need to actually get the job done. Everything else in there is about kind of keeping that mRNA safe and getting it where it needs to go. So we wrap the mRNA up in a little blanket, like bubble wrap of something we call lipids or like fats, right? We have to kind of keep these salts in there to kind of keep the acidity of it where it should be. So there are 4 salts for that. And then there is a sugar in there, simple sucrose really, that kind of helps that bubble wrap stay intact kind of when those vaccines are in their super cold state. And that's it. That's what's in there. Now, really the more maybe complex conversation about this is that mRNA, right? That messenger RNA, which has gotten a lot of attention because I know people are like, what's this new approach? And it happened so quickly and we're really concerned. And I think that's a really good point. So I just want to speak to that for one moment. We have a scientific basis for these new technologies and vaccines, this mRNA that goes back over a decade. Really was the Obama administration invested quite substantial resource in getting this technology to a place where we could just rapidly, as we've seen in this past year, advance it. Teams of really diverse scientists have been working on mRNA and getting these mRNA vaccines where they are. So important to recognize that. right? The representation and diversity in the scientific community, as well as in the participants, as we talked about before. So what the vaccines actually do is they give our bodies what I call a harmless preview, right, of the virus that allows us to create a defense system so that when we actually see the real virus and get exposed, our bodies are ready to go into immediate attack and fight it. So really just critical. If you remember only kind of one thing today, it is that it is impossible to get COVID-19 from taking the vaccine. 100% impossible.
And the mRNA, that's not going to change the way our DNA works or anything like that. Okay.
No, I think it's so important. I mean, I'm fully aware that there is, just a lot of information out there, and it's going to be hard for everyone just getting bombarded with all this information. So I appreciate opportunities like this to be in conversation, to speak to what we know and what we don't know. But the things we know for sure, they do not interfere with the DNA of our bodies. I know there are concerns out there about infertility too. There's nothing out there to support that as well. And really importantly, that you cannot contract COVID-19 from taking the vaccine. This is, I think it's also important for people to know what to expect when you get vaccinated. So just like we get vaccinated for other things, you might have some soreness where you get the injection for, a few days. Sometimes as evidence of our body doing what it's supposed to, we may feel a little bit achy, a little unwell, we may get a little fever. All of that is completely normal. So we should have as many conversations about kind of what that means. Take Tylenol and it'll be okay. So, just very grateful to have the chance to speak to some of these things that I know are kind of out there in our orbits. I get texts all the time from good friends asking these same questions.
I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure Nan will do more surveys, especially geared at distribution and how making sure that there's equitable distribution in our communities, because we've seen how it was hard for us to get testing, even when it came to like the economic pieces. It was hard for our businesses to get those loans. So we're really big on making sure that there's equal justice, equal access for everyone. So I hope we can speak again in the near future. But thank you for taking the time on King Day.
Our Lifetime of Excellence in Public Service Award honoree is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Anthony Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, where he oversees an extensive research portfolio focused on infectious and immune-mediated diseases. As the longtime chief of the Laboratory of Immunoregulation, Dr. Fauci has made many seminal contributions in basic and clinical research and is one of the world's most cited biomedical scientists. He was one of the principal architects of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a program that has saved millions of lives throughout the world. Thank you, Dr. Fauci, for your commitment and dedication to medicine and science.
The Martin Luther King Jr. breakfast held annually by Martin Luther King III and I for the National Action Network is virtual this year because of the pandemic. One of the concerns Dr. King had was equal access to healthcare. In his last book, written in 1967, he stressed that in a book entitled Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. In the midst of this pandemic, one that we feel has stood head and shoulders above other Americans, making sure that we were properly informed, properly cared for, and equally accessible to healthcare in general, and specifically around the pandemic we face, is Dr. Anthony Fauci. Dr. Fauci is the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease at the U.S. National Institutes of Health, where he oversees an extensive research portfolio focused on infectious and immune-mediated diseases. As the longtime chief of the NIAID laboratory, of immural regulation, I should say. Dr. Fauci has made many seminal contributions in basic and clinical research and is one of the world's most cited biomedical scientists. He was one of the principal architects of the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, something that was very, very helpful and needed in our communities. It's a program that saved millions of lives throughout the developing world. We felt that the person of the year for 2021 that operated in the spirit and teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He has become familiar to us all over the world because of his work during this time, but he has never abandoned, as he has done the work, the making sure that it was fairness and the advocacy for healthcare for all. And that is the spirit of Dr. King, to no matter whether you're dealing in times of high profile or anonymity, that you remain stable and steady in your discipline. No one has personified that this year than Dr. Anthony Fauci. It is for that reason, on behalf of National Action Network, Martin Luther King III and I, we present this Martin Luther King Person of the Year Award to Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Thank you very much, Reverend Sharpton. It is truly a great honor and humbling to receive this award from the National Action Network, particularly an award that's associated with the name of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a person who I have such extraordinary respect for over so many of the years that I followed the work that he's done and the work that has really been inspired by his life since then, work that you and your colleagues have done. I just want to take this opportunity in my thanking you for this extraordinary honor that you're bestowing on me. The understanding that we really must double down on our commitment to make sure that brown and black people are afforded the advantage of vaccination against COVID-19. We all know that in so many aspects of life, the brown and black people get the short end of the stick in things when it comes to health, particularly the increase in incidence and prevalence of infection among African Americans and Latinx. Not only that, but the increased incidence of the underlying comorbidities of medical conditions, which are much more prevalent in brown and black people: hypertension, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, chronic lung disease, kidney disease, which is the reason why when minority populations, particularly African Americans, get infected with COVID-19, that the rates of hospitalization per 100,000 are multiple times than that of whites, and the death rate is 1 to 2 times more prevalent than in the white population. We've got to address that. The reason for that are the things that are deep-seated in society that lead to the social determinants of health, that hopefully the lessons that we've learned from this outbreak will make us be more committed to eliminate those determinants of health that have been so destructive to the health of the African American population. So in accepting this award, I want to vow that I will continue to do everything I can within the context of my profession to make sure we alleviate those discrepancies in health. So thank you again, Reverend Sharpton. I really appreciate this honor.
Well, thank you, and you certainly earned it, and we look forward to continue to working with you and the commitments that you have not only made verbally, but have demonstrated in your career. Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you, sir, very much.
All right. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a show. Congratulations to all of our honorees. Thank you so much again for joining us. To join or donate to the National Action Network, visit us at the website below or the number below. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook to learn how to get involved. Again, we wish you a safe, healthy, and happy 2021.